The situation in Japan was certainly tragic, and it remains ominous. What are the implications of that disaster on U.S. policy?
Even prior to Fukushima, it was clear that nuclear power could not compete against alternatives, including many renewable and clean alternatives, truly clean alternatives. But there was a huge denial, and there has been, and the nuclear industry has been able to go to give a lot of campaign contributions, lots of advertisements, making nuclear look clean and green as a solution to our energy needs. But in order to build, because they're so expensive, they need massive amounts of subsidies. A huge number of these subsidies were passed in a bill in 2005, called the Energy Policy Act of 2005. One of the provisions of that bill was providing loan guarantees for new reactors. Congress needs to authorize how much loan guarantees can be given out. And right now the industry has $18.5 billion authorized for loan guarantees. Of that $18.5 billion in loan guarantees, 8.3 have been offered for 2 reactors in Georgia at the Baizel site. So this is the debate right now in Congress. If there's going to be new reactors, they need a lot more money they need a lot more loan guarantees. And what are loan guarantees? Loan guarantees are promises by the federal government, i.e. the taxpayers, that when these reactors default, for any reason, for some reason the company can't pay back the loans, that the taxpayer will pay the loans back for them. In the case of the loan guarantees for nuclear, even with these loan guarantees, the nuclear industry cannot get Wall Street to invest in new reactors. Wall Street knows that new reactors are bad investments. They learned that the last time we built the 104 reactors we have today. So we are actually not only promising to pay back the loans, but they're able to go to a taxpayer-funded bank called the Federal Financing Bank and borrow that money. So when we give them a loan guarantee, we're also loaning them the money and promising to pay ourselves back when they can't pay the money back. So this is the debate that's going on right now. Prior to Fukushima, we already knew all of this. Fukushima only reaffirmed for Wall Street why a multi-billion-dollar investment can turn into a multi-billion, hundreds of billion dollars worth of liability in a matter of hours. Nuclear power is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dirty for the entire life cycle. And it is clear that Fukushima has made a real impact on people in the United States. Prior to Fukushima, the public opinion polls were a little more than, around 40, a little less than 50% of the population were opposed to nuclear power. Now the polls are showing 70% opposed to nuclear. So that's been the major shift in terms of Fukushima on U.S. public opinion. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., you would think that Fukushima isn't even happening because Congress is still talking about new reactors as if it's still a good idea, as if they're clean, as if they're a clean, safe technology. And President Obama, for the second year in a row, has requested $36 billion more in nuclear loan guarantees, for a total of $54.5 billion of loan guarantees. This is enough to cover 6 to 8 reactors. Can you imagine what you could do with that kind of loan guarantees for efficiency, which costs 3 cents per kilowatt hour? We could revolutionize this country if we put that money into truly clean energy sources. But President Obama, 2 days after Fukushima started, came out and stated again, said, it is my policy to build new reactors in the United States, and I want the $36 billion in loan guarantees. A few days later, he restated that. A week later, he called again for his clean energy standard, which is 80% clean energy by 2035. Sounds great, but clean is defined as coal, nuclear, natural gas, and maybe some renewables thrown in. So in the debate in Congress is still a bubble, and they need to hear from people. They need to hear from people. Because they're only hearing from the nuclear industry. The latest release from the nuclear industry on Fukushima was that so good that the Japanese government did such a great job managing the Fukushima reactor accident. And no one's going to be hurt, no serious radiation was released, and everything is perfectly fine. They have meltdowns every other day. So I think the most important, there's a real dichotomy between what the public in the United States is seeing and hearing and what their opinion is and what's happening in Congress. And the role of the folks who are doing blogs cannot reiterate enough that it is absolutely key that we make nuclear power an issue in 2012 election. Because right now, all of the candidates thus far who are looking to run against President Obama and President Obama himself are saying that they want nuclear power as part of our energy mix.
Thank you. The next question I have is for Bruce Baizel of Earthworks. Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, has been in the news a lot lately. Can you tell us what this process entails and why it is so environmentally harmful?
Well, I've been working on oil and gas for almost a decade now. And when I first came on, then we were called the Oil and Gas Accountability Project. We came in right at the beginning of the Bush years, and there was this discussion about what is this hydraulic fracturing, nobody had ever heard of it. EPA, maybe you should look at that. Well, the same bill that had the subsidies in that, the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and that came out of the Dick Cheney Energy Task Force, put in a provision that said, oh, by the way, EPA, you can't regulate this thing called hydraulic fracturing. And so that bill is one of the darkest periods in our history. We were so depressed after that went through because there were other things, NEPA exemptions and all, the whole works. But at that time, people didn't really know about hydraulic fracturing. Then a couple of years ago, I don't know if you know the head of Chesapeake, but they're the ones that went in and said, we'd like to lease and drill in New York City's watershed. And to do that, we're going to have to use this technique called hydraulic fracturing and combine it with being able to drill upwards of close to a mile sideways from where we actually put our hole in the ground, this horizontal drilling that you hear about. Well, that was the one place in the country that if he had any decent advice, I guess you'd say, you would not want to drill, because New York City can match this industry dollar for dollar and in their media savvy. And what that did was started this debate about what is hydraulic fracturing. And in fact, in simple terms, it's putting pressure down your wellbore, your well hole, and causing a mini earthquake. And when you do that, you put that pressure in there, it cracks the rock, and with that pressure you put in either bits of sand or manufactured particles along with a chemical cocktail to help hold those cracks open from that earthquake. And that allows the gas then to flow up, because in the shale formations, that gas is held really tightly and it doesn't come out, and that's why it hasn't been economical to go after before. So hydraulic fracturing, you're splitting that rock open so that the gas can flow. And when they've done that, their costs go down because they make us pay for all the contamination. They found it was economical to produce from those formations. But because they went into New York City, where you've got 9 million people that are drinking the water that's downstream from them, you now got this debate about, well, what is it you're putting in that chemical cocktail? And as we've been pushing towards getting disclosure in the FRAC Act, for those of you that are Credo members, there's a nice action alert put out by them recently on that. We appreciate that. The FRAC Act says, you got to tell us what you're putting down there, energy companies. And we need some regulation. We've got to get rid of that exemption, that prohibition on EPA regulating. That's the two things that act would do. Simply tell us what you're putting in, and let's get some regulation, allow EPA to regulate. Well, they've been fighting it tooth and nail. It's an industry that's grown up in the dark. They've never had to be transparent about things. So whether it's what they're doing with hydraulic fracturing, whether it's what's coming back up and being in the big pits that you see pictures of, Josh Fox in his movies got pictures of those pits. Except for the exemptions they have under federal law, that would be hazardous waste. And it would have to be treated and permitted as such. They're now using tracers to find out where their fractures are going, and many of those are radioactive. If that stuff comes back up out of the ground, they should be getting a permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because of the level of radioactivity. But this is an industry that doesn't like to tell what it's doing. So the initial push with hydraulic fracturing is just tell us what we're putting in down there. And then we can have a debate about, was that a good thing or not? So that's what the hydraulic fracturing, politically it's an argument they can't win. If it's safe, they should be willing to tell us. If it's not safe, then why wouldn't you regulate it just like you would any other toxic substance? So that's hydraulic fracturing.